It was a brisk autumn morning, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air as Marcus Taylor pushed open the heavy glass door of the Daily Brew, a popular coffee shop nestled in the heart of a bustling city. Dressed in a neatly pressed jacket adorned with his military pins, Marcus exuded a quiet dignity. He was a man in his late 40s, with close-cropped hair that had begun to gray at the temples. His eyes reflected the stories of a life spent serving his country, years that had shaped him into a man of resilience and principle. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Marcus had developed a routine since returning from his final deployment. Each morning, he visited the Daily Brew, where he ordered his usual, a medium black coffee with a hint of hazelnut. For Marcus, the coffee shop was more than a place to sip a cup of joe. It was a space to reflect, plan his day, and feel a connection to the rhythm of civilian life. The baristas, mostly college students, knew him by name and greeted him warmly, as did several other regulars who appreciated his friendly demeanor and approachable nature. But this morning was different. Behind the counter stood Eric Randall, a recently hired manager known for his curt, no-nonsense approach. Eric was in his mid-30s, clean-shaven and impeccably dressed, but there was an edge to his demeanor that made some employees uneasy. When Marcus approached the counter to place his order, Eric's expression soured. "We don't serve people like you here," Eric said flatly, his voice cold and cutting. Marcus froze, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. "I said we don't serve people like you," Eric repeated, his gaze hardening. "You're making the other customers uncomfortable." The words hung in the air like a slap, drawing the attention of those nearby. A young woman standing at the counter dropped her phone in shock, and an older man at a corner table lowered his newspaper, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. Marcus felt a wave of anger rise within him, but he held it in check. Years of military training had taught him the value of discipline and composure. "I'm not sure what you mean," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "I come here almost every day. I've never caused any trouble." Eric crossed his arms and leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "I know your type. You think wearing a uniform makes you special, but it doesn't give you the right to loiter around here." Marcus's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the room on him. Some sympathetic, others hesitant, unsure how to react. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the soft hum of the coffee machines. Rather than escalate the situation, Marcus decided to leave. "I won't argue with you," he said quietly, "but I'll remember this." He turned and walked out of the coffee shop, his head held high despite the sting of humiliation. As the door closed behind him, a murmur of discontent rippled through the room. Several patrons expressed their outrage, questioning Eric's behavior. The young barista who usually prepared Marcus's coffee looked visibly upset, her hands trembling as she worked the espresso machine. "Why would you do that?" she asked Eric, her voice shaking. "Marcus is one of the nicest customers we have." Eric dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "If you have a problem with how I run this place, you're welcome to find another job." Outside, Marcus stood on the sidewalk, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. The insult burned, but he refused to let it define him. Instead, he began to formulate a plan. Marcus was not a man to let injustice go unanswered, but he also believed in addressing wrongs with dignity and purpose. He spent the rest of the day making phone calls, reaching out to friends, former colleagues, and members of his local community. By evening, word of the incident had begun to spread. Social media platforms lit up with posts recounting what had happened, many shared by customers who had been present. People expressed their shock and outrage, demanding accountability from the Daily Brew and its management. Marcus, however, stayed quiet online, preferring to let his actions speak louder than his words. 2 days later, Marcus returned to the Daily Brew. This time he was not alone. A crowd of supporters had gathered outside the coffee shop, holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcus," "Racism has no place here," and "Respect our veterans." Among them were local activists, fellow veterans and members of the community who had heard about the incident and wanted to show their support. As Marcus stepped through the door, the room fell silent. Eric was behind the counter, his face pale and tense. The young barista who had questioned him before stood to the side, her expression one of quiet triumph. Marcus walked up to the counter and placed a crisp $20 bill on it. "I'd like a medium black coffee with hazelnut, please," he said calmly. Eric hesitated, his hands trembling. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could respond, the owner of the coffee shop, a woman named Linda Foster, stepped out from the back room. Linda was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s with years of experience running small businesses. She had heard about the incident and come to address the matter personally. "Mr. Taylor," Linda said, her voice firm but respectful, "on behalf of the Daily Brew, I want to apologize for what happened here. It was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for ensuring it never happens again." Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he said simply. Linda turned to Eric. "You're fired," she said bluntly. "I won't tolerate discrimination in my establishment." Eric stammered in protest, but Linda silenced him with a glare. "Leave, now!" As Eric stormed out, the room erupted into applause. Linda addressed the crowd, thanking them for standing up against injustice and promising to implement diversity and inclusion training for all employees. She then invited Marcus and his supporters to stay for complimentary coffee and pastries, an effort to make amends. Marcus accepted the gesture graciously, but knew his work wasn't finished. He saw the incident as a teachable moment, an opportunity to spark meaningful change. Over the next several weeks, he worked with local organizations to promote awareness about racism and the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their background. The incident at the Daily Brew became a catalyst for broader conversations within the community. Marcus was invited to speak at schools, community centers, and local events, sharing his story and advocating for unity and understanding. The coffee shop itself underwent a transformation, becoming a hub for inclusive events and discussions about social justice. Marcus's actions demonstrated the power of responding to hatred with dignity and purpose. What had begun as a moment of humiliation evolved into a movement that inspired others to stand against discrimination. The Daily Brew, once the site of a painful encounter, became a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together to right a wrong. And as Marcus sipped his coffee each morning, surrounded by a now welcoming community, he reflected on the lesson that had guided him through life. True strength lies not in how you react to adversity, but in how you use it to make the world a better place. Marcus Taylor's story resonated far beyond the walls of the Daily Brew. The confrontation with the manager, Eric Randall, was not just an isolated act of discrimination. It reflected a broader societal issue that many had encountered but few had been able to address as powerfully as Marcus had. What followed was a cascade of events that transformed both Marcus's life and the community at large. The local news caught wind of the story first. A small newspaper ran an article detailing the incident, highlighting Marcus's calm yet resolute demeanor in the face of blatant racism. The piece went viral on social media, with readers sharing their outrage and solidarity with Marcus. People from across the country and even internationally began reaching out to him with messages of support. Some shared their own experiences of being judged or mistreated based on their race, appearance, or background. Marcus read every message he received, taking solace in the knowledge that his story had sparked meaningful conversations. But Marcus wasn't content to let his experience be just another viral moment. He was a man of action, and he believed in using his platform to create lasting change. Encouraged by the overwhelming support, Marcus decided to establish a nonprofit organization which he called Bridging the Divide. The organization's mission was simple yet profound: to combat racism and foster inclusivity through education, dialogue, and community engagement. It began as a modest endeavor, a series of workshops and events held at community centers and schools. Marcus used his own savings to fund the initial programs, which focused on teaching people about the impact of microaggressions, implicit bias, and systemic inequality. The workshops quickly gained popularity. Marcus's ability to connect with people on a personal level made him an effective and inspiring speaker. He didn't preach or lecture. Instead, he shared his story and invited others to share theirs. His military background gave him a unique perspective on teamwork and unity, values he believed were crucial for dismantling prejudice. One of the most powerful initiatives of Bridging the Divide was the Walk in My Shoes program, where participants spent a day experiencing life from the perspective of someone from a different background. For example, a white business executive might spend a day shadowing a black single mother, or a young college student might accompany an elderly immigrant to navigate bureaucratic challenges. These experiences were eye-opening for many, and helped foster empathy in ways that lectures and books could not. Back at the Daily Brew, the changes initiated by Linda Foster were profound. True to her word, she implemented diversity and inclusion training for all employees, hiring specialists to lead workshops that addressed unconscious bias and the importance of cultural sensitivity. She also created a policy of zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior, ensuring that what had happened to Marcus would never happen again. The coffee shop began hosting monthly events that celebrated the diverse cultures of the community. There were poetry nights featuring works by local artists of various ethnicities, cooking demonstrations highlighting traditional dishes from around the world, and open forums where people could discuss issues of race, identity, and belonging. Marcus often attended these events, sometimes as a speaker, other times as a participant, but always as a reminder of what had inspired the changes. The shop's regular customers noticed the transformation too. Many who had initially been hesitant to speak out against Eric's actions now felt empowered to stand up for what was right. The sense of community grew stronger, and the Daily Brew became a place where people felt welcome and valued regardless of their background. As Bridging the Divide gained traction, Marcus began receiving invitations to speak at national conferences, universities, and even corporate events. His story had captured the attention of major media outlets, and soon he was featured on television programs, podcasts, and in prominent publications. Through these platforms, Marcus emphasized the importance of accountability, not just for individuals, but for institutions as well. One of the most significant moments in Marcus's journey came when he was invited to speak before Congress. The hearing was focused on addressing systemic racism in public spaces and businesses, and Marcus's testimony was both heartfelt and impactful. He recounted the incident at the Daily Brew, not as an isolated event, but as a symptom of a deeper problem that required collective action to resolve. Racism isn't always loud and obvious, Marcus said, his voice steady but impassioned. Sometimes it's in the way people look at you, the way they treat you differently without even realizing it. But when we ignore it, we allow it to grow. It's time we all take responsibility for creating spaces where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. His words struck a chord with lawmakers, many of whom thanked him personally for his courage and leadership. Marcus's testimony contributed to the passage of new legislation that encouraged businesses to adopt diversity and inclusion policies, with incentives for those that actively work to combat discrimination. Amid his growing prominence, Marcus remained deeply rooted in his community. Despite his busy schedule, he made time for the people and places that mattered most. He continued to visit the Daily Brew, not out of habit but as a symbol of reconciliation and progress. He struck up friendships with other regulars, sharing stories and laughter over cups of coffee. Marcus also took time to focus on his own healing. While he had handled the situation with grace, the experience had left emotional scars. He sought therapy to process the hurt and anger he had felt, learning to channel those emotions into positive action. The process deepened his empathy for others who had faced discrimination, and it strengthened his resolve to keep fighting for change. On a more personal note, Marcus reconnected with his love for painting, a hobby he had pursued before joining the military. He found solace in the creative process, using art to express emotions he couldn't always put into words. Some of his paintings, inspired by his experiences and the people he had met through Bridging the Divide, were displayed at local galleries and quickly became a source of inspiration for others. Marcus's work also inspired young people to get involved in the fight against racism. High school and college students, moved by his story, began organizing their own initiatives to promote inclusivity on their campuses. Marcus often mentored these young leaders, offering advice and encouragement as they navigated the challenges of activism. One particularly meaningful project was a documentary created by a group of college students about Marcus's journey. The film, titled From Brew to Bridge, chronicled the events at the Daily Brew and the ripple effects that followed. It featured interviews with Marcus, Linda Foster, community members, and even former customers of the coffee shop. The documentary was screened at film festivals and won several awards for its powerful storytelling. As Bridging the Divide expanded its reach, Marcus began collaborating with organizations in other countries that were addressing issues of racism and discrimination. He traveled to Europe, Africa, and Asia, learning about the unique challenges faced by different communities and sharing insights from his own experiences. These international partnerships enriched the work of Bridging the Divide, bringing new perspectives and strategies to the table. In South Africa, Marcus participated in a reconciliation program inspired by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In Japan, he spoke at a symposium on combating xenophobia. And in Brazil, he joined activists working to address racial inequality in education and employment. Each experience deepened his understanding of the global nature of prejudice and the universal need for empathy and justice. One day, Marcus received an unexpected message. It was from Eric Randall, the former manager of the Daily Brew. Eric had been following Marcus's work from a distance, and the events of the past year had forced him to confront his own prejudices. In his message, Eric expressed remorse for his actions and asked to meet Marcus in person. After much thought, Marcus agreed. The meeting took place at a small diner far from the public eye. Eric was visibly nervous as he apologized, his voice trembling with emotion. He explained that losing his job and seeing the impact of his behavior had been a wake-up call, one that had led him to seek therapy and educate himself about racism and privilege. Marcus listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When Eric finished, Marcus extended his hand. "I appreciate your apology," he said. "The real work starts now. Keep doing it." The meeting, while not a resolution, was a step toward healing for both men. It underscored Marcus's belief in the possibility of redemption and the importance of holding people accountable while also giving them the opportunity to grow. Years later, Marcus's story remained a touchstone for those striving to create a more equitable world. Bridging the Divide had grown into a nationwide organization with chapters in cities across the country. The Daily Brew was still thriving, its transformation a testament to the power of accountability and change. Marcus himself continued to be a beacon of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, it is possible to stand tall and inspire others to do the same. His journey was far from over, but he faced the future with the same quiet determination that had carried him through his years of service. As Marcus often said, change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen alone. But together we can build bridges where there were once walls, and that's a legacy worth fighting for. As Marcus Taylor's impact deepened, his focus shifted toward systemic solutions that would address the root causes of racism and inequality. He had built a platform not just on the strength of his story, but also on his ability to connect with diverse audiences and bring them together for a common cause. While Bridging the Divide was flourishing, Marcus knew that true, lasting change required tackling entrenched structures of prejudice and inequality. One of Marcus's new initiatives was the Community Ally Program CAP, a partnership between Bridging the Divide and local governments. The program aimed to train and certify volunteers as community allies, individuals who could mediate disputes, educate others on diversity and inclusion, and provide support to marginalized groups. These allies underwent rigorous training that included workshops on cultural competence, active listening, conflict resolution, and historical context for racial and social issues. CAP's goal was to create grassroots agents of change who could address discrimination wherever it appeared in schools, workplaces, public spaces, or even within families. The program launched in Marcus's hometown, but it quickly spread to other cities. One of the most notable successes came when a group of CAP-trained allies intervened in a neighborhood dispute between longtime residents and a growing immigrant community. Through facilitated dialogue and collaborative projects, the allies helped both groups see their shared humanity and common interests. The neighborhood, once divided by suspicion and fear, began hosting cultural exchange events and saw a dramatic decrease in tension. Recognizing that many acts of discrimination stem from workplace dynamics, Marcus turned his attention to corporate America. He partnered with executives from major companies to develop programs that promoted diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) in the workplace. Rather than treating DEI as a checkbox exercise, Marcus emphasized the business case for fostering a culture of respect and belonging. He highlighted research showing that diverse teams were more innovative, productive, and profitable. One of his key contributions was a corporate pledge called the Humanity Initiative, which called on businesses to commit to measurable actions in hiring, training, and community engagement. Companies that signed the pledge agreed to publish annual reports on their progress, ensuring transparency and accountability. The initiative gained traction, with hundreds of businesses signing on within its first year. To support these efforts, Marcus helped design a leadership training program for executives and managers. The program used real-world scenarios to teach participants how to identify and address bias, foster inclusive teams, and create policies that promoted fairness. The training became a benchmark for excellence in corporate DEI, and many of the businesses that participated saw significant improvements in employee satisfaction and retention. As the movement grew, Marcus recognized the need to empower the next generation of leaders who could carry the torch forward. He established the Bridging the Divide Fellowship, a program that provided mentorship, funding, and resources to young activists, scholars, and entrepreneurs dedicated to combating racism and inequality. The fellowship attracted applicants from all over the world, each with their own vision for change. Among the first cohort was Amara, a college student who started a campaign to address racial disparities in healthcare access. With the fellowship's support, Amara developed a mobile app that connected underserved communities with free or low-cost medical services. Another fellow, Javier, used his grant to create a documentary highlighting the experiences of undocumented immigrants in rural America, shedding light on their struggles and contributions. Through the fellowship, Marcus not only supported these young leaders, but also fostered a network of changemakers who could collaborate and amplify each other's efforts. The program became a launchpad for innovative ideas, many of which went on to achieve national recognition. Marcus's work increasingly took on an international dimension. He was invited to participate in a United Nations conference on racial equity, where he joined activists and policymakers from around the world to discuss strategies for combating discrimination. During the conference, Marcus shared the story of the Daily Brew and the transformation that followed, framing it as a microcosm of the broader fight for justice. In one of his keynote speeches, Marcus emphasized the importance of storytelling in bridging divides. "Data and policies are essential," he said, "but it's stories that touch hearts and inspire action. When we share our experiences, we remind people of our shared humanity, and that's where change begins." Inspired by the conference, Marcus helped establish an international coalition called the Global Equity Alliance. The alliance brought together organizations from different countries to share resources, strategies, and best practices. One of its first collaborative projects was a campaign to combat hate speech online, leveraging technology and education to counter the spread of divisive narratives. In addition to his advocacy work, Marcus found himself increasingly drawn to the arts as a means of promoting social change. He collaborated with playwrights, filmmakers, and musicians to create works that explored themes of racism, resilience, and reconciliation. One of the most impactful projects was a play titled The Brew, which dramatized the events at the Daily Brew and the aftermath. The play toured theaters across the country, sparking conversations and workshops in each city it visited. Marcus also contributed to an anthology of essays and poetry written by activists, artists, and community leaders. His own piece, titled Stirring the Pot, reflected on the power of small acts of courage to ignite larger movements. The anthology became a bestseller, with proceeds going to support Bridging the Divides programs. Music played a role in Marcus's outreach as well. He worked with local musicians to organize benefit concerts that raised awareness and funds for racial justice initiatives. These events brought together people from different backgrounds, united by a shared love of music and a commitment to making a difference. While Marcus's public life was full of activity, his personal life also took on new meaning. Through his work, he met Cassandra, a journalist who had interviewed him early in his journey. Cassandra was as passionate about justice as Marcus, and their shared values created a strong bond. They began a relationship that grew into a partnership both in life and in their advocacy work. Cassandra brought her own expertise to the table, using her platform to amplify marginalized voices and tell stories that often went unheard. Together, she and Marcus became a formidable team, combining their talents to drive change. They eventually married in a small, private ceremony attended by family, friends, and many of the people who had been part of Marcus's journey. The couple also decided to adopt 2 children, giving them a loving home and instilling in them the values of empathy, resilience, and service. Marcus often spoke about how being a father added new depth to his understanding of the importance of his work. "Every step I take is for them," he said. "I want them to grow up in a world that values who they are and what they can become." Despite his many successes, Marcus faced his share of challenges. Not everyone supported his efforts, and he encountered backlash from individuals and groups resistant to change. Online trolls targeted him with hateful messages, and some business leaders dismissed his initiatives as unnecessary or disruptive. Marcus met these obstacles with the same calm determination that had defined his response to Eric Randall. He refused to be derailed by negativity, focusing instead on the overwhelming support he received from allies and communities. He also saw resistance as an indicator that his work was making an impact. "When you challenge the status quo, there will always be pushback," he said. "But that's how you know you're on the right path." As the years passed, Marcus found moments to pause and reflect on his journey. He often returned to the park near his home, where he would sit on a bench with a cup of coffee, sometimes alone, sometimes with Cassandra or his children. These quiet moments reminded him of the importance of balance, of finding peace amid the whirlwind of advocacy and activism. He also reflected on the role of forgiveness in his journey. While he would never excuse Eric Randall's actions, Marcus believed that holding on to anger would only weigh him down. "Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook," he said. "It's about freeing yourself to move forward." By the time Marcus turned 60, his work had touched millions of lives. Bridging the Divide had grown into a global movement, with chapters on every continent. The Daily Brew, once the site of a painful encounter, was now a beacon of inclusivity, its walls adorned with art and photographs celebrating the community it served. Marcus's story was taught in schools and universities, and his name became synonymous with resilience and hope. Yet he remained humble, always emphasizing that the work was bigger than him. "This isn't about me," he often said. "It's about all of us and the world we're building together." In his later years, Marcus began writing his memoirs, hoping to capture the lessons he had learned and pass them on to future generations. The book, titled Building Bridges, became an instant classic, praised for its honesty, wisdom, and humanity. As he penned the final chapters of his memoir, Marcus looked out the window of his study, where he could see the community he had helped shape. The world wasn't perfect, but it was better, and he knew he had played a part in that. With a contented smile, he picked up his coffee, savoring the warmth of the cup in his hands. For Marcus, the journey was never about the destination. It was about the bridges built, the walls torn down, and the lives changed along the way. And as long as there was work to be done, he would always be ready to take the next step. As Marcus continued his work, he became increasingly drawn to fostering unity among diverse groups that often found themselves at odds. He realized that one of the greatest barriers to progress was the lack of dialogue between communities. While much of his earlier work focused on addressing racism and discrimination against specific groups, Marcus now sought to bridge divides between disparate factions, urban and rural populations, religious communities, and political ideologies. He launched a new initiative called Shared Table, inspired by the belief that breaking bread together could break down barriers. The program brought together individuals from conflicting backgrounds to share meals and stories in an informal setting. Farmers sat beside city activists, conservative leaders alongside progressive thinkers, and veterans shared their experiences with young activists fighting for systemic change. Over a meal, differences softened, and commonalities emerged. These gatherings were transformative for many participants, leading to partnerships that extended far beyond the dinner table. Marcus also created a podcast, Voices Across the Divide, which featured guests with opposing perspectives engaging in constructive conversations. He acted as a moderator, ensuring that discussions remained respectful and productive. The podcast became a hit, praised for its ability to foster understanding in a polarized world. Listeners often commented on how the conversations helped them empathize with viewpoints they had previously dismissed or misunderstood. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the coffee shop manager's actions toward the veteran? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.